Hello and welcome to Season 4 of the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. For the past few years, host Jorden Guth has been learning about the who, the what, and the when of hi-fi from the pioneers who made our hobby what it is today, as well as the modern innovators who are constantly striving to push performance to new levels. That's not going to change, but this year he'll also be learning about the other two W's, where your favorite gear is made these days, and why. So with that out of the way, let's see who Jorden is chatting with this time around.
Hello and welcome to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. Today we have John Siau, VP, part owner, and Director of Engineering at Benchmark Media Group. And we will also have our producer, Dennis Berger, jumping in at some point to kind of get a little bit more technical as we talk about some of the technologies, specifically filters, that Benchmark uses. And just for fun, I'm going to mention that this is the last episode of Season 4. So, after this, we're going on to Season 5, and we'll tell you more about that in the future. But for now, welcome, John.
Thank you. And congratulations on 4 seasons here of the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been an absolutely wild ride. And Dennis is here as well. And he was the Season 1. It was him and Brent. And then Season 2 through now has been me. So, yeah, congratulations to you too, Dennis.
It's been a wild ride, bud.
All right. So, John, there's a lot that we can talk about and a lot that I kind of want to get to. And I think to start, before we get into Benchmark and some of the technologies, tell me a little bit about your origin story. Like, how did you end up? What was or if you have the moment in your memory of getting into audio for the first time, getting into hi-fi?
Well, my father was a radio ham. And so we always had all kinds of radio equipment in the house and all kinds of electronics. And I was a collector of any piece of wire I could get, capacitors, transformers, resistors, whatever I could get and put together and make cool stuff. And I remember one of the first things that my dad and I did was making an audio amplifier. I said to my dad, I really want to make an audio amplifier. I want to make an amplifier. And so we basically built one from scratch with vacuum tubes and put it together and then eventually turned it into an intercom so that we could talk between the basement and the first floor. And,
that's super cool.
Yeah. And so I always knew that I wanted to do something with electronics. And when I went to school, I actually switched and got into mechanical and aerospace engineering because at the time I was spending all my hard-earned money as a kid taking flying lessons. So
no way.
Yeah,
I love planes. I'm a total plane nerd as well.
So I never did get my license, but I did do a little bit of flying until I ran out of money. But that got me into mechanical and aerospace, and then I got involved with a local band doing sound for them, and changed my major and got into electronics, and so I was headed toward doing something with audio, but actually took my first job in video instead of audio. And so I worked for 5 years for CBS Television in Stamford, Connecticut, designing digital video equipment. And specifically, we got into, in 1980 to 85, designing HD TV. And this is 20 years before HD TV came on the scene. So we had equipment from Japan. We had a lot of equipment from Sony and from other companies in Japan. And we were proposing a 525 line, I'm not a 525, a 1050 line, exactly double NTSC television. So we were going to double the number of lines. And it was different than the system that the Japanese were proposing. And so my project was designing a digital frame store. It would store one frame of HD TV. And this was a 7-foot tall rack full of 1K by 1 dynamic RAMs. And so this was the very first digital frame store for television, for digital, for HD TV. It was 50 amps 3-phase going into this rack to power it, and very quickly heated the room up. But it would store a frame of video, and it would take 1125 video and give you 1050 output, or it would take a 1050 input and give you 1125. And so it would do conversions between some of the Japanese equipment we had and some of the prototype equipment that we had put together at CBS.
That's awesome. That's so cool. It's also amazing to consider, like, I'm in the video space as well, but like filming more than anything, the amount of technology that's gone in to get us to where we are today.
Oh, like, it's incredible.
Now, Today I could almost watch a movie on my watch if I really wanted to. And you're talking about 3-phase 50 amps to kind of get a single store of a frame. Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So when you were going from kind of the video side of things, this was, you mentioned kind of mid-'80s. Did you transition into the hi-fi space, or kind of how did we get from designing video components for CBS to kind of learning about and getting into Benchmark?
Yeah, so the next thing that I did is I took a job with General Electric in Syracuse designing video projectors, and so it was digital processing for their Teleria video projectors. The Teleria projectors were a light valve projector, very with a vacuum tube, basically. Very complex device, but I built a digital processor for it, digital video processor that improved the resolution of it. And I did part of that as a consultant for them, and then I did my next consulting job was actually an audio job, building a karaoke box for Thompson Consumer Electronics. And then I did a consulting job for Benchmark, designing their first A to D converter.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. And so
when was that, John?
That was the late 90s. Between, I guess, about 1997, I did design work for Benchmark as a consultant, and then ended up coming on full time, and then eventually becoming a stockholder.
That was a very different era for digital to analog conversion than we're in now. I would say, like, DACs weren't exactly the I don't want to, how do I want to put this? They're not quite the commodity that they have become in some respects today. It was a very different landscape. So talk to some of our younger listeners about like what the DAC market was like at the time, what the technical landscape was like at the time, and what technical challenges you had with regard to designing a digital to analog converter in the late 90s.
Well, certainly we didn't have the wonderful chips that we have now, but we had some pretty decent chips that were capable of doing 48 kilohertz at 20 bits. So the first A to D that we built was a 20-bit A to D converter that could do 96 kilohertz. And I'm sorry, it wouldn't do 96 kilohertz. It would only go 44.1 and 48. And that was 20 bits. And then we did a 20-bit D to A converter. And then a couple of years later, we started to be able to get 96 kilohertz hardware, 96 kilohertz digital audio receivers and transmitters, and DACs that could run at 96 kilohertz because that they didn't exist. And the early A to Ds and DACs often perform more poorly at 96 kilohertz than they did at 44.1 or 48 because the oversampling ratio was cut down. And so at that time, we were still advising people, you're going to get the best performance at 44.1 or 48. And that quickly changed, and the next generation of chips maintained the oversampling ratio at 96 kilohertz and gave you good performance. And then, that followed on eventually with chips that could do even higher sample rates. Now, I think from a production standpoint, 96 kilohertz 24-bit recording is just a real sweet spot for production work, and of course you're going to want to do your recording and editing in a floating point environment. But 96 kilohertz is a great format. There's really no compelling reason to go to higher sample rates for audio, although you see a lot of marketing hype that promotes higher sample rates, and we support higher sample rates, but really 96 kilohertz is the sweet spot.
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of 96 kilohertz audio available in the late 90s, really. So was the advantage of having 96 kilohertz capabilities mostly a production thing?
Yes, mostly a production thing. And so I wouldn't necessarily look for 96 kilohertz files if you're streaming audio, because a lot of times those have been upsampled, and you don't want the upsampled files. The upsampled files very often have got built-in, baked-in, clipped intersample peaks. And so if the original recording was 44.1/16, get the original format. Don't get an upsampled version of it. It's been run, the upsampled versions have been run through some bulk upsampler, and they've got distortion baked in. And so the best recording is going to be whatever the original format was. And you'll find that's one of the things with streaming. You'll find that you've got 4 different versions of the same recording, and you really got to take a look at it and say, well, gee, there's the 44.16. That's the original one, and here's a later release, or here's a remastered one. And I generally prefer the original mastering of most recordings. It's so many times I've seen, the extra fingerprints on there just haven't helped it. And there's something about hearing it in the original mastering version. A lot of times is there's something to be said for that.
Cool. Jorden, sorry about jumping on your toes there. I just couldn't resist the urge to provide a little nerdery in our history lesson. So as you were.
Well, and I think this it has me thinking about a lot of questions related to Benchmark, because my understanding Benchmark was founded in the late 80s, if I'm remembering correctly.
Early
80s?
Actually, early 80s, about 40 years ago. So we're about 41 years into this now. So 85, 84.
Okay.
Yeah.
And and again, this is my understanding, and correct me here if I'm wrong, but one of the biggest things, and I see it on your website, I see it on the About, and like everywhere I go, it's all about transparency.
Mm-hmm.
And do you want to just touch on that a little bit? Because I actually really like the way that it gets approached, where we even talk about listening versus measuring, and what transparency typically is, and what it does, and the reason why your aim is transparency.
Well, we began as a manufacturer of audio equipment for television. Now, you would think that audio for television doesn't need to really be that good, especially in the days of the old NTSC televisions. The audio quality coming out of the speaker wasn't always that good. But what did exist in those days is that you had many audio distribution amplifiers taking the audio and sending it all over the broadcast center, sending it all the way across the country through distribution amplifier to distribution amplifier, through telephone lines, and by the time you got to your 4-inch speaker on the side of your TV set, there wasn't much left to it. So the quality of audio in television wasn't very good, and it was largely due to all of these cascaded distribution amplifiers. So what Benchmark did, what Alan Burdick, our founder, did, is he said, I can build a much better distribution amplifier. And he said, if we're going to have these things cascaded, we need a 200 kilohertz bandwidth. We need a 130 to 140 dB signal to noise ratio, so that by the time we get to the 10th hop, you've got something that's still studio quality. And so we started by making these very transparent distribution amplifiers for television. We sold many of these to ABC Television, to Voice of America for their radio programming, and National Public Radio. So we had a number of high-profile customers that bought benchmark distribution amplifiers because of this very wide bandwidth and high transparency. And then we transitioned from that into building microphone preamplifiers for and A to D converters and D to A converters for recording studios.
Wait, and there is still quite a bit of you still have products that service the professional market, not necessarily just hi-fi.
Yes, and they're actually the same products that we sell to hi-fi. Now there's the DAC3 converters, for example. There's at least 50 of those in Abbey Road Studio.
Oh yeah,
for their monitoring chain. And again, in a recording studio, it's really important to be able to hear exactly what you're putting down on the recording. You don't want your playback equipment to change the way it sounds, because you'll end up creating a recording that's just the opposite of whatever change your equipment is causing. So, for example, if your DAC was boosting the bass, you'd end up with a recording that had weak bass, or if it any other part of it wasn't right. If it was too bright for some reason, you'd make a recording that was not as bright as it should be. So it's really important in a studio environment to have a transparent monitoring chain, and then how does that translate to the home environment? If you want to hear a recording exactly the way it was created in the studio, and the way the producer heard it in the studio, and the way the artist heard it in the studio, your playback system also needs to be transparent.
Would you say there's a big difference between kind of the pro market and the general hi-fi market? Or does there need to be a difference?
The pro market is a lot more focused on understanding the various measurements and performance, and focused on, is this going to give me transparency? Is this going to be a tool that I can rely on in my studio? Whereas the hi-fi, there's a lot more voodoo, I would say, where there's just all of these. We run into more strange ideas every day than you can shake a stick at.
It is interesting because I think the goal is the same in large part, but the ways to achieve it, when you have the pro market, they seem very analytical about their kind of methods, where you get into kind of a more feels like or feeling approach in the hi-fi range. And that's just my perspective on it. But you guys have kind of and I really like this, listening versus measuring section on your website. And it all kind of goes back to this: transparent products usually produce an impressive set of measurements, but non-transparent products will usually produce a poor set of measurements. But that's not the entire case of it. So as much as your products are aiming to be fully transparent, there is a listening approach to them as well.
Yes, a lot of times, we can do measurements, and if we're not doing the right measurements, there might be something that we pick up in a listening test that we don't stumble upon in the measurements, because we're not doing the right measurements. More often, the other is true. A lot of times we can measure things that we can't hear. With modern test equipment, we can measure things 140, 150, 160 dB below the level of the music, well below the threshold of hearing, and we can see defects that would never be audible. But there are a few cases where you'll pick up on something, and there's just something that doesn't sound right. And you start digging into the measurements, and eventually, when you do the right measurement, you discover what the problem is. And one example of that was intersample overs, the clipping of intersample overs in D-to-A converters. And we discovered that actually through a listening test, not through a measurement. Now we have a measurement that very easily shows us when we have a problem.
So talk to me a little bit about this. What was happening and what was the solution to that?
So we built, I think it was our ADC1 A to D converter. It had the ability to switch a sample rate converter in and out of the circuit.
Okay.
And this sample rate converter, if you were to measure it on the bench, it had 135 dB signal to noise ratio and very, very low distortion. And there's no way that it should have been impacting the sound of the audio. In fact, the filters were properly designed and everything. And so we, switching that in and out, very distinctly could hear that it was brighter when the sample rate converter was operating. And it didn't make any sense at the time. And we discovered when we started digging into it that the sample rate converter didn't have enough headroom for the peaks of the waveform when those peaks fell between two adjacent samples.
Gotcha. So if it happened to hit it dead in the center, it might be fine.
Right.
But when it's trying to average from either side, it's not doing a good enough job.
Right. And so most of the time, the peaks are falling between the samples. It's the exception rather than the rule that the sample happens to fall exactly on a peak. So in all cases, the peak amplitude of the waveforms that you're digitizing will always be higher than what than the measured values of the samples themselves, because of the fact that there's a peak between the two adjacent samples. And a sample rate converter attempts to reconstruct more samples in between those two samples. An oversampling DAC does the same thing. It reproduces samples or produces samples in between the two actual samples to reconstruct the analog waveform. And that reconstruction process is very accurate, but only if there's enough headroom for it to reconstruct those peaks.
John, one of the reasons that I'm sitting in on this conversation is because when Doug Schneider was talking to you guys, he came back to me and he was like, these guys are singing your song with regard to linear phase brick wall filters. And it's like every time I review any sort of DAC that's got a bunch of different filter options, I'll play around with them. I'll give my impressions of sort of sonic character they give to them. And then I'll end up saying, but go with the linear phase brick wall filter. It's technically correct, and technically correct is the best form of correct. So when he had that conversation with you guys, he was like, these guys are singing your song. I wonder, I would like to sort of pick your brain about where the quote unquote technical arguments for these different forms of filters perhaps come from. And I wonder if you agree with me that a lot of it has to do with this silly notion of pre-ringing. We see when you look at the measurements of a DAC and you look at like a 1-bit impulse, you can see these little ripples going up to it and leading away from it if it's a linear phase filter. But then you get into a minimum phase filter and they're like, oh, we've moved the ringing to after the impulse. But then you look at it and it's like at like, negative 106 dB, the peak of these ripples. And it's like, well, okay, I mean, it's like there's a reason to measure that, but like does that measurement translate into something that you could actually hear? Whereas, the minimum phase filters like do maybe they solve your problem of ringing or whatever, but they can also introduce audible artifacts. And I want to pick your brain and sort of hear your argument, because like you design these things for a living. I just sit and pontificate about them. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on the measurement of those impulse responses, and like why a linear phase brick wall filter is the best, and also whether that calculus changes when we're talking about high resolution audio, 96 kilohertz and above.
Oh, this great questions. Now, the interesting thing is that the brick wall linear phase filter actually doesn't add ringing, and these other filters actually do. And the way that you can see this is you can cascade A to D and D to A converters. And so you take an analog waveform, feed it into an A to D, take that digital output, feed it into a D to A, take that analog output, feed it into another A to D. And so we can cascade 16, 32 stages of A to D and D to A conversion. And when we're using linear phase filters, the wave shape that goes in matches the wave shape that comes out, irregardless of the phase of the sampling to the transient itself. So what goes in comes out. Now, the minute I take any one of those DACs or A to D converters in that chain, the minute I put any filter in that's not linear phase, the wave shape coming out does not match the wave shape going in. Furthermore, the wave shape changes as a function of the phase relationship to the sampling clock. And so what should have been a static waveform is dancing around and changing depending on what the phase relationship is to the clock. Mm-hmm. So what people don't realize is aliasing in the time domain is a time displacement. Mm-hmm. So it moves the transient in time. Aliasing in the frequency domain creates folded back frequencies. So a high frequency can become a low frequency. But aliasing in the time domain is actually an error in the time that the transient occurs.
Is this as important an issue when we're talking about 96 kilohertz, where all of a sudden the sort of Nyquist frequency is like way above the ability for bats to hear?
No, it's a lot less important when we go to higher sampling frequencies, because all of the bad things that occur in the filters occur in the transition region, right where they're starting to roll off and or where they're halfway rolled off. So in a 44 kilohertz system, those problems are happening between 18 kilohertz and 22 kilohertz. That's the region where the various filters make a difference. Once we get to a 96 kilohertz sampling system, there are fewer problems as long as we're not getting massive amounts of aliasing that are causing frequencies to fold back into the audible region.
Excellent. One more question, and then I'm going to hush and let Jorden talk, but I could see his poor eyes glazing over. So we've brought up Nyquist theorem a little bit, but we didn't really explain that. So, and we also try to appeal to an audience who maybe doesn't have the deeper technical understanding. So could you explain Nyquist theorem a little bit and how that affects DAC design and digital audio in general?
So think about maybe a wagon wheel going around, and if you've seen an old movie, you see the wheel may look like it's going backwards, or it may look like it's going forward, and we have to take enough snapshots of that to see which direction it's going. maybe a simpler way of describing this is, let's suppose I've got people running around a racetrack, okay? And so I can, if all I'm doing is taking one sample for every time they go around the track, I can tell you how long it took them to get around the track. But based on that measurement, I can't tell you which way they were running. I can't tell you if they went around once or they went around exactly twice or exactly 3 times. But if I increase my sampling rate, now I get a snapshot of them halfway around and I get a snapshot of them all the way around. And that's, again, if it's exactly twice, if I'm getting exactly 2 samples, I still can't tell you which way they ran, but I can tell you where they were halfway around and where they were once they got all the way around. If I have slightly more than 2 samples while they're running around, now I see them a little less than halfway around, and or maybe a third of the way around, 2/3 of the way around, and then all the way around. I can tell you which way they were running. I can tell you how fast they were running, and I can even tell you where they were between samples. Okay, because I know their average speed. I know that their speed doesn't change very rapidly because they're trying to maintain as constant a speed as they can. And so I can tell you that exactly 23 seconds, that runner was right about here. And at 45 seconds, the runner was right about here. And so with enough samples, I can reconstruct their position at any point in time. And that's what oversampling in your DAC does. And that's what a sample rate converter does. It creates those samples that we never took. So I never measured their time 1/4 of the way around, but I have enough information to tell you exactly when they got to that point on the racetrack, within a certain margin of error, but very close to exactly when they got to that point on the track.
Would obviously increasing the sample rate will reduce your margin of error. Is the limitation right now on increasing the sample rate simply the chips and the technology that are available, or is there other limitations to consider that you just wouldn't want to kind of increase the sample rate any further?
Okay, so the accuracy of being able to tell you where the runner was on the track is a function of the number of samples I took, and it's also a function of how rapidly they can change their speed. Okay, and if they're changing their speed very rapidly, that's when I need a higher sample rate.
Gotcha.
But as long as that rate is less than half of the frequency, that if the frequency of that change is less than half of my sampling frequency, then I can reconstruct the position.
Gotcha.
And if they're making changes, if they're making multiple changes between my samples, then I can't tell you exactly where they were.
Kind of shifting gears a little bit, but we're talking about all this, and it sounds like you're still very much involved in kind of the design and the research and development of the products. We kind of alluded to this a little bit, but I don't know if we ever actually mentioned the fact that Benchmark is based in the United States, based in Syracuse, New York.
Yeah, that's correct. So our engineering is based here, our manufacturing is based here, and we're very committed to keeping our manufacturing in the United States. There's always lots of pressure to, make your product here in our, in China. I've got Chinese companies reaching out to us all the time, trying to get us to, use their manufacturing services, and we can make your your AHB2 amplifier for this price, or we can make your DACs for this price. And there's always lots of opportunities to do that, and we flatly reject those.
What is it about kind of having the technology made here that appeals to you? Is it that you're just that close to it that you can influence things throughout the entire process, or is it like a fundamentally different quality level that you're getting by having the manufacturing here as opposed to overseas?
Yeah, it's a different customer experience because it's repaired here, it's designed here. You can talk to somebody that speaks English. You can call us up on the phone. We'll answer your questions. And it's a different experience if you're buying some foreign made piece of equipment that is really designed to be thrown out in. When it quits, you throw it out and you buy another one. That's not what benchmark gear is. Now, obviously, that costs more. So there's a cost, and not everybody is willing to pay that cost. A lot of people want the cheapest widget that they can possibly get, and they're going to throw it in the trash when it breaks and buy another cheap widget. And our equipment's designed to last for the long haul and give you many years of enjoyment.
Do you find that over the last, I'm going to say, year or so, with all the tariffs and all that stuff, do you find people are more willing to kind of buy the American-made products versus others, or has this impacted you in other ways in foreign sales, or is there any impact to you guys at all?
Well, we do see some impact in that some of the parts we purchase, have tariffs on them that they wouldn't have had otherwise. However, the tariffs, as an American manufacturer, the tariffs are tremendously helpful to us in helping us compete against products that are made in China. When Chinese products can come in tariff-free, and we have to pay tariffs when we sell products into China, that's a very tilted playing field. And we do sell products into China. Recording studios in China buy our products. We sell products into South Korea. We have a pretty good market, actually, for our products in South Korea. But that imbalance of them having to pay a tariff when they buy our product, but consumers here not having to pay tariffs on products coming in from South Korea or coming in from China is not a level playing field. So we are very much in favor of tariffs because of the fact that we're an American manufacturer.
And you mentioned that some of your some of the components weren't necessarily made in the United States, and I'm thinking it's probably something like the ESS chips and stuff like that. But the actual manufacturing, the pressing, the chassis, and pretty much all the components that you can do in the United States are being done in Syracuse.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we design our own circuit boards. We populate the circuit boards right here in New York State. They're machine populated using parts that we buy from all over the world. So electronic components, a particular chip, like you mentioned, the ESS chip, is only going to be made in one particular location.
Yeah.
If you're talking about AKM chips, those are made in Japan primarily, and so those are going to come from Japan. Capacitors might come from Japan. They might come from Germany. They might come from the U.S. And so all of these components, we purchase all the components. We warehouse all the components here, and populate the boards and put the boards into the chassis. The chassis components are primarily made in New York State. We do get some of our metal work done in Toronto.
Oh, no way!
Yeah.
Oh,
so we bring some in from Canada, but the vast majority of it is made in New York State.
Oh, very cool. You've been very gracious with your time, and I don't want to take up too much more, but there is this common question that we ask towards the end of each guest appearance, which is if there was a track that you could recommend, or one that kind of is the soundtrack to your life that you could always listen to. Is there something that you can share with us that gives us a sense of what you like musically, but also so I could steal it and put them on my my playlist to hear some new music?
Well, this kind of ties back to something I talked about earlier, where we're talking about different versions of the same track, and there was a live version of Hotel California that was live on MTV in 1994. Okay. It's the original version is great in that there's all of these 3D effects of the audience, just the way it was captured on the microphones, and that original version is very, very cool. The remastered version, they ruined it.
Oh yeah.
and so I was able to find an original version on I had to go on eBay, I think, to get it, because it's not available on any of the streaming services. It's not available on Tidal. It's not available on Qobuz. And
this is a CD that
is Hell Freezes Over, Eagles.
Okay.
I think this is the one from November 8th, 1994. That's the original version. Hell Freezes Over.
I'm gonna try and track one of those down. That sounds like a good time.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to A/B that against the more recent version, which is 2018.
Okay.
So you don't want the 2018 remaster, which is the only thing you will probably find on the streaming services. You want the original version of Hell Freezes Over.
Love it. I'm gonna try and track that down and give it a listen. John, thank you so much for jumping on, and look forward to seeing and hearing about you and Benchmark in the future.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Jorden. Thanks a lot, Dennis.
Thanks, man. It was great to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
Hey, Jorden, don't forget. Tell people we got season 5 coming up, man. Hype the future, 5. Buddy. Hype it up.
We have season 5 of the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast coming up. Yeah. We need to do a little off mic kind of huddle to figure out how we're gonna hype this up. But yeah, there's some cool things coming.
We should tease it though. We should tease it. We should go ahead and say I'm gonna throw the gauntlet down and announce right here and now that the theme of season 5 is gonna be the future of hi-fi. So
Ooh.
Yeah.
Love it.
I'm playing dangerous games here, man. But yeah, that's what we're doing. We're going to explore that from all different avenues. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Me as well.
All right.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Anytime.